Welcome everyone. My name is Eric Johnson. I am the Digital Marketing Analyst here at Paragon Solutions, and I will be your webinar host for today. I want to personally thank you all for joining us for today's webinar titled 5 Common Mistakes Made When Managing Change. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details. When you initially logged in, a control panel appeared, usually on the right side of your screen. This control panel can be closed and opened at any time during the webinar by clicking the red arrow button found toward the top left of the panel. Use the questions panel to submit questions anytime during the webinar. We will hold all questions until the end. If time does not allow us to answer every question, we will respond to you directly. This webinar will be recorded, and a link to the video and the presentation slides will be emailed to you within 48 hours. You will also be able to find it on our website listed here. Finally, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that takes approximately 2 to 3 minutes to complete. If you have the time, we would appreciate your feedback so we can continually provide value and ensure that the topics are relevant to you. I'd like to provide a brief introduction to Paragon Solutions and today's speaker. Paragon is a professional services firm providing a full spectrum of consulting services from advisory through solution design and implementation for tighter alignment between business and IT. We focus on building solutions that address our clients' specific needs. We are headquartered in Cranford, New Jersey, and have offices throughout the U.S. and Europe. Paragon has been in business for over 30 years, building industry and domain experience in the life sciences, financial services, communications, healthcare, and insurance industries. If you would like to follow Paragon Solutions on Twitter, you can do so at Consult Paragon. If you would like to tweet your questions, comments, or participate in the online discussion as we live tweet during the webinar, you can do so by using the hashtag ParagonLive. Our presenter today is Jeff Lewis, the Director of Life Science Advisory Services for Paragon Solutions. Mr. Lewis has over 20 years of experience developing and implementing strategies, increasing revenues, and improving operational efficiencies for Fortune 500 organizations across diverse industries. If you would like to contact Jeff, you can do so via his LinkedIn page and by email. Also, if you have time, jump over to Jeff's blog on consultparagon.com to learn more about change management and strategy. A quick fun fact to get to know Jeff better: he likes to collect vintage guitars. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you everybody for attending today. I'd like to lead with a slide that shows a quote by Arnold Bennett, and that is that any change, even a change for the better, is always accompanied by drawbacks and discomfort. The reality for all of us, of course, is that change is inevitable, and whether good or bad, people tend to fear it. What's noteworthy about Arnold's quote is that he, as an exponent of the human condition, really addresses one of the issues that change management is meant to deal with, and that is the way people react to change and the nuance that is the human condition when confronted with change. So let's talk about what change actually is in terms of industrial age and knowledge age workers. They're both internal and external forces that bring about change. For example, new systems, new processes or procedures, new products, new management or organizational strategies, changes in the marketplace, or even changes in regulatory requirements. It's very likely that some of these might be occurring in your business as we speak. What is interesting is that these types of changes are often out of the control of the people impacted. To a degree, this is also true of the impact at the enterprise level. Just as change is inevitable, so is the reaction to change by people. For example, people often fear change. They might resist change either actively or passively, or be uncertain about what the change means to them at the individual level. Change management is the tool to address this fear and resistance and uncertainty and prepare the workforce for the future environment. What's interesting is that this opportunity can be really looked at from a change management perspective to change other aspects of that working environment. It can be used to open the door to introduce a new culture that drives changes in behavior, behavior that allows people to better collaborate, innovate, and work as teams. So looking at the active side of change management rather than just addressing some of the fear and resistance issues. You can see from this staggering statistic on the screen that change management is key to undertake and to do correctly. It's estimated that 70% of programs that involve change have been unsuccessful over the past 5 decades. While you would imagine that we've learned our lesson over time, most studies still show a 60 to 70% failure rate for organizational change projects, a statistic that has stayed constant from the 1970s to the present day. My personal theory for this is that change is often the first time to be cut from project budgets. Without a project or change, there's no need to manage it. At face value, it makes sense, but in reality, it would be better to descope the project slightly and retain some of that change management budget. What's important to note, though, is that not all change is created equal. Change impacts all projects regardless of size, nature, or purpose of project. That we agree on. Yet not all of that change is of the same dimension. In order to effectively manage change, project teams must adopt a tailored, individualized approach to each change situation. For example, projects that impact a smaller user community might require fewer communications and some targeted training to bring about awareness and upskill a specific set of users, while projects that impact a larger set of stakeholders across geographies, divisions, and functions would require a far more comprehensive change management program to ensure full awareness, adoption, and to drive individual and organizational capabilities. So why do we see the project failure that we mentioned earlier? There are a number of mistakes that people make by either ignoring change management or not applying it effectively. We'll walk today through the most common mistakes of these. But first, a question. How do you typically find yourself responding to change? So now let's look at the first mistake of the day. This is one among many that often occurs early in a project and impacts and sets the scene, in fact, for many of the resistance activities that people might be involved in throughout the project process. Activities that might be either active or passive resistance, sharing information that might be incorrect or untrue about the project simply by virtue of lack of awareness. So the reasons for the lack of awareness, oftentimes it's because team members don't understand the rationale for the change or the bigger picture or even why the change is occurring. Change seems irrelevant or unrelated to their day-to-day job. Oftentimes communications when they come from an organization tend to address how the project is going to impact the organization and not how it's going to impact the individual a day, a week, or a month in the life of their work. In other situations, if people are not being communicated to directly, the indirect communication channels, such as the office grapevine, might be providing inaccurate information, as I mentioned before. Additionally, there's the possibility of information overload. We're constantly being bombarded with information from within and outside the organization, meaning that the information we're trying to communicate might be buried amongst this plethora of information that's being brought into our email boxes every day. There's also another thing that occurs throughout change management initiatives, and that is often the tendency to associate change management solely with communications. This sometimes drives people to over-communicate, leaving employees to get in a pattern of deleting the constant and potentially time-wasting communications they often see. So how do we address this common mistake? The key is to develop and implement a comprehensive communication strategy and plan. In addition to describing the new environment, the value and benefits, and the impact, a communication plan often details a number of aspects of the communication setup, messaging, and delivery. These things include the communication model, the communication team roles and responsibilities, the communication vehicles to be used for inbound and, very importantly, outbound communications, the definitions of the audience and stakeholders and the types of messages that are going to resonate with them, and expectations for the messages that they would like to receive throughout the communication activities. And finally, the timing and the delivery of those messages, which messages will be sent when. The fundamental goal is to reach key audiences with targeted messaging before, during, and after the change to prepare, inform, and support the overall program. Successful communications focus on conveying key information such as a clear vision of the future state and its value to the impacted individuals, what's in it for me, or the WIFM principle, the value of the change to people and to the organization, for example, increased efficiency, less redundancy, time saved, things that appeal to both management level, executive level, and of course, workforce on the ground. So now let's look at mistake number 2. Understanding that communication is one part of the solution, now let's take a look at the motivation factor. And that is that people are often have not been properly motivated to embrace the change. A recent Gartner publication highlighted the importance of properly motivating people during a change. As you can see by the quote on the screen, it's important that leadership and the project team understand the motivating factors and that they capitalize on those motivating factors to select and apply the appropriate change management tools. We referenced before through that novelist the human condition and how that relates to change management. Human condition and reaction to change is well known, and what we see on the screen now is Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. This is a well-developed position on what motivates people and what's important to people over time, basically from their physiological needs, safety needs, loving and belonging, and obviously people throughout a project need to feel the love and feel that they're being included in a project, the esteem by virtue of rewards and recognition, and self-actualization, that ability to operate autonomously, confidently in the new environment. Now, when we look at some of the conditions that contribute to a lack of motivation, if these are the things that motivate people in terms of what their human needs are, let's look at the things that demotivate them or typically happen that might conflict with the needs of individuals. Certainly there's past experience or previous projects that didn't deliver the expected outcome in spite of a high level of motivation that people might have had to begin with. Projects that ultimately had a negative effect. This memory will stick with people and therefore they will be less motivated for future projects. Second point is lack of inclusion in the planning process. This can leave people frustrated and feeling like decisions have been made without their input. This can be very demotivating as stakeholders will not feel that they have a voice or that their perspective is not being represented in the change. And thirdly, unclear or inadequate rewards, recognition, and incentives can also cause people to feel that they're being asked to change but are not receiving anything in return for their efforts. Okay, so firstly we want to engage and incentivize stakeholders by highlighting the value of change, ensuring that they know how it will affect them. And we assume in all cases, or in many cases, this is going to be a positive effect. What this means is consistently and ongoingly look for opportunities where you can listen to stakeholders and provide a forum for receiving input and feedback, and of course logging that input and feedback so that it can be responded to directly but also incorporated into future messaging and other changes in the change management strategy. Gaining an understanding of current levels of motivation, identifying and validating the motivating drivers that people respond to. And this differs across organizations, whether it be geographies, cultures, divisions, or functions. And finally, document and share stakeholder ideas, opinions, and concerns so people don't feel that the idea has gone into a black hole and never come out or been considered. All of these actions will show people that you're listening. This information you gather will help you to drive future decisions and continuous improvement of the change management activities and, of course, informing the overall program that you're applying the change to. Now that we've addressed the issue of motivation, at a high level at least, let's look at our third common mistake, and that is a no pulse check. Whilst traditionally a medical term, what we're trying to do here is understand how people are responding to change. That response to change will change over time. Initially, we might find that people are apathetic about a change, but as time goes on, their embracing of the change ultimately to be fatigued by messaging, and so therefore we need to understand that cadence or change in attitudes and respond to it very methodically. Best laid plans often fall apart over time because attitudes to change are not continually identified and addressed. Therefore, it's important to continually capture feedback to gauge how the change management activities are being received and whether or not they are having the desired outcome. Questions around what are the right number of communications? Are people receiving the right messages? Are they actively engaged? Are there things that are preventing them from being engaged? Are all relevant questions to include in this analysis. Many times there is no pulse check and analysis of this situation. And it's very much, when we do a pulse check, focused on the attitudes, receptiveness, participation, and support of the program, which are critical to the overall program success. This topic begs the question, what would we want to find out if we were able to measure employee attitudes? The answer in this case is quite surprising. As you can see, an unfortunate fact for corporate America, and I imagine corporations around the globe, some 65% of workers are unsatisfied with or apathetic about their current job. So far we've been talking about change as it relates to a project. In this case, we're looking at attitudes as it relates to general dissatisfaction within a working environment. Without taking a pulse check, of course, there would be no way to gauge this type of dissatisfaction or to properly address it from an organizational change perspective. Therefore, it's important to continually check the pulse of the organization and to understand if the messages are still resonating and relevant and determine if they are timely and targeted so that people can respond to them. So far, we've talked about change in the context of a program. I think this statistic highlights that Although an unfortunate fact, we could use change management techniques to periodically assess the organization and do a pulse check. We can also leverage a program to spread the change management activities a little bit more broadly beyond the program so that we can understand if there are any underlying issues with the organization that we can address through this change management program. In this case, change management programs offer us these opportunities to uncover those latent issues or disconnects. When you take a pulse check of employees, you often uncover opportunities that otherwise would be unknown. So how do we go about measuring this type of information to gain a pulse check and uncover those opportunities for improving corporate culture? Obviously, we look at measuring the effectiveness and the impact of the change management. For us, it's all about understanding where each of the impacted individuals is at, where stakeholders fall with respect to key attitudes, receptiveness, as we've mentioned, and also their comfort level with change. Change is a constant, and depending on the appetite for change of both the organization and the individuals, at some point there can be too much change that becomes the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. We need to understand that level of receptiveness by using these pulse checks. Methodologically speaking, the process begins with establishing a vision that serves as the guidepost throughout the change initiative. Having a clearly defined vision of what the future should look like from a cultural perspective, including the mindsets and attitudes that will most promote and encourage the change, allows you to target that for the future state, but also baseline where that is at currently. With your vision in place, you can begin to survey stakeholders and analyze the results, and then adjust the change management program to address pain points as well as any newly surfaced information or opportunities for improvement. Once you understand where employees are at, you can take a close look at what training and skills are needed to ensure that change is successful, and also understand what supporting environment needs to be put in place to drive that change into the steady state. This brings us to our next big mistake. Mistake number 4, the gap in skills where people have not been properly trained to operate in the new environment. In this situation, employees are often not equipped with the proper skills to operate in the new environment, as we mentioned before, whether it be new processes, systems, technologies, or ways of operating. And where that training either does or doesn't exist, it may not be remediated where gaps exist or continued so that people have the opportunity to practice and continually develop their skills. We know that the stakes are high when it comes to training and ensuring that employees have the skills that they need, whether it's knowledge of a new software or training on a new process or procedure. So how do we provide targeted, high-impact training? Effective training begins by determining your audience and their specific needs from a knowledge and capability perspective. Once you've determined this, you can identify the best channel or method of delivery. There are many emerging trends in training, including iPad training, interactive and avatar-based training, computer-based training, distance training, as well as traditional methods such as classroom-based training and workshops and train the trainer. Any or all of these can be leveraged to develop a training strategy and program that will best meet the needs of your organization. As you can see from this statistic, only 2/3 of the potential training program's value is realized. This is due to the failure to provide formalized training and opportunities, as I mentioned, for ongoing practice. A safe environment where people, if they're using a new system, can interact with that system, learn the techniques at their own pace. We mentioned earlier communication plans. Communication plans should dovetail with the training program so that the training is consistent in terms of messaging about the program, in addition to its primary purpose of upskilling or cross-skilling individuals. So now let's look at mistake number 5. In this instance, the most common mistake is not having a supportive environment. And by a supportive environment, what we're talking about is the infrastructure, the processes, procedures, things like the mentoring, coaching, and reporting relationships that exist, all of the things that will give impacted individuals the channels and materials and environment that they need to be able to learn, develop, and meet the goals of the overarching program. Individuals need the right environment in place to be successful and to adopt the change. And without that right environment, change management initiatives often fall short and fail to reach their fullest potential. Change management should go on beyond the completion or the go-live of the particular project, and a supportive environment allows people to continue to evolve and develop and embrace the new environment that the project has brought about for them. As we can see from the statistic, having the right environment definitely pays off. It's no surprise that establishing the right environment with supporting systems and processes can have a huge positive impact on the performance of employees. You can see here that the success of projects increases tenfold when the right environment is established. So how do we go about creating a supportive environment? First, we have to begin by establishing or identifying what the appropriate infrastructure is that supports the organization before, during, and after the change. This includes, for example, creating communities, the training and ongoing support that we talked about before, establishing mentoring and coaching relationships so that people have immediate and interactive support available to them as and when they need it, providing job aids to ensure that people can look to information that can help them on a task that might be completed periodically. We all know with our tax returns we don't need to learn how to do them until about April 14th, and therefore a wizard-driven job aid is very effective for that point in time, and we can let that go until the next year. The same types of job aids can be applied, or that same notion can be applied in the workplace for the steady-state operations to reduce calls to a help desk, to reduce errors, and to ensure that people have the information at hand that they need to be effective. The goal, of course, is to make change as sustainable as possible by setting up the right infrastructure. In addition, this enables scalability over time and efficient transfer of knowledge as new employees join the organization. So let's recap. The things we know are that change is inevitable, and just as change is inevitable, the reaction to change by people is equally inevitable and predictable. And by virtue of that predictability, we can therefore methodologically or systematically address that change in a way that can bring about greater project success. Today we've identified 5 mistakes that are common when organizations are implementing a program and on top of that a change initiative. This is by no means a comprehensive list. As you can imagine, there are many mistakes that people might be doing, either large or small, that impact either positively or negatively the success of a change management program. If proper change management strategy is implemented, these mistakes can be avoided. So the key takeaway here is that change management is that systematic approach to preparing and supporting people through change. A well-conceived and executed change management strategy will enable you to avoid the mistakes that we've described and successfully bring about that change in your organization.
Thank you, Jeff. That was great information around change management, how organizations can ensure a successful change program by avoiding some of these common mistakes. It really seems like a lot of them are simple fixes. Thanks. Now, as we have some time left, I would like to move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar as we have received a bunch of questions. Thank you everyone for sending those in. If time does not permit, we do not get to your question, we will reach out to you directly. Jeff?
Okay, so we have the first question here. If there's so much data about the value of change management, why over the past few decades haven't companies used these techniques more? As I mentioned earlier, my personal opinion and experience quite often is that projects are conceived and budgets allocated, and as those budgets tend to be tightened, change management is often one of the first things to be removed from the program. That's sad, but the reality is, of course, that without a project there's no reason to do any change management. I think my personal view is that rather than retaining the full scope of the project and eliminating change management or other aspects that can help make that project successful, it would be a better decision to not necessarily include the entire change management program, but to descope the project slightly or just enough to at least allow some core change management activities to be conducted, whether they are focused on the communication, whether they are identifying training requirements such that they can be potentially delivered by internal resources or lower cost resources. I think having a sound strategy is key, and then being able to operationalize that with existing team members or identifying new team members who can participate within the organization still allows change management to be effected without negatively impacting the project or requiring that additional spend. We have a second question. How do I know if I'm using the right type or amount of change activities for a given project? There's been an amount of research that's been conducted over the years and some ratios developed about for a project that touches X number of people or is of X dollar value, then perhaps 5% or 10% of the budget of that project should be applied to change management. I think the answer is far more complex than that, and also far more simple. I think the due diligence of understanding the impact, whether it be small or large, and tailoring the program to that will give you the best sense of whether you're applying too much or too little, or the wrong or right types of change management activities to a program. Also, the pulse check that we mentioned before provides a good ongoing test of success of the change management activities, as well as referencing any prior projects where change management has been applied and doing a lessons learned on that to see what was effective, what works in your organization, and what doesn't. Organizations are very different from each other, and therefore change management and the culture and the way in which these techniques are applied should also be different, scaled accordingly, and configured according to the situation at hand. Okay, third question, and this is an interesting one in terms of roles and responsibilities. So change in larger organizations can often be driven by a dedicated change management function. It can be an offshoot of human performance groups or human resources. There might also be a change management center of excellence, or in fact we often see project management playing a role in change management. If we look at this question of how much of a role does the project manager play in change management, by virtue of being the primary hub of information about a project, they are the de facto change management resource. They are reporting status probably on a weekly basis. They are reporting risks and issues at an executive level. They're reporting financial information to key stakeholders throughout the duration of the project, and they're obviously communicating to the project team what activities are required to be done and what is the status or any deviations from the plan that need to be addressed. So the role of project management with respect to change management is integral. What is very important around the change management addition to that is that change management should be run by a change management practitioner who understands all of these nuances and techniques that we've described today, but it should be done in lockstep and tightly coupled with the project management. I often recount a situation where change management not being dovetailed with project management might prepare a communication about a go-live of January 1, only to find that there's been a delay in the project at the project management level that wasn't communicated, and therefore a go-live was pushed to February 1. That brings about some of that demotivation that we talked about before, introduces distrust and unreliability about the information. So it's very key that those two functions are deeply and tightly integrated. Okay, we have another question. Historically, why does executive leadership not support ongoing change to support proper implementation of changes that affect the organization? Good question. And change management is often viewed, well, it's viewed through multiple lenses and means different things to different people. Throughout my experience, I've seen change management referred to as very focused on executive leadership change, enabling leaders to drive change throughout an organization. So very top-down driven. In other situations, I've seen it driven from those middle tiers where change proliferates outward, and you're hoping for and expecting executive support. And then, of course, at the lower project level, change management becomes very tactical and is manifested in training, communications, and day-to-day support. I think the reason that leadership tends not to support change is because it's viewed in two different lights. I think in one light, it's often misinterpreted as a warm and fuzzy aspects, team lunches and things to bring people on board that might be a luxury item that the company can't afford, and if people need that to be motivated, they might not be the right people. We expect people to be motivated by the opportunities we provide at the organization. So I think it's potentially not being in touch with that 65% statistic of apathy or dissatisfaction in the corporate environment. I think also with cost cutting, there's less support for driving change, and when we live in an environment where there are lots of mergers, acquisitions, layoffs, and so forth, that cause people to react in a way that is not as strategic as they would prefer. It becomes very tactical, moving people around, getting new roles and responsibilities defined, and dropping people into the right boxes to be able to perform the work with less consideration about the emotional impact on the people that it is going to touch. And I think primarily, though, it's just a potential disconnect between seeing the value of change management applied to projects that are successful, because if it is applied correctly, it is often invisible in terms of the end result of the project. Projects tend to be measured in terms of success by virtue of being on time, on scope, and on budget. Whereas now I think we'll actually see a change in the future that the success of a project is based on the outcomes that that project was meant to deliver. So the ROI, the future state conditions, and the steady state operational value that are directly related to the change management activities. So I think as executive leadership changes to that point of view of outcome-based, results-based, ROI-based project spend, rather than plan to actuals, I think we'll start to see a change in those attitudes.
That concludes our webinar for today. We hope you were able to find this information useful as you move forward in 2014. If you have additional questions, as Jeff mentioned, feel free to reach out to him directly at his email address listed on screen. Thank you for joining us. We understand your time is valuable and appreciate the time you took to be with us today. If you have additional 2 minutes, we'd appreciate your time to complete a short survey to help us serve you better in the future. As a quick reminder, a recording of this webinar and the slides that go along with it will be sent to you via email within 48 hours and will also be available on our website. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.